Flight attendants see everything: the chaos, the kindness, the weirdness, the dangers, and the moments that never make it into travel vlogs or TikTok aesthetic reels. What most passengers don't realize is that the world inside an airplane operates by an entirely different set of rules. And the people walking down the aisles in pressed uniforms, smiling while offering you coffee, are juggling a reality where safety, efficiency, and human unpredictability collide every minute. Behind every calm announcement, behind every tray table reminder, behind every polite smile, there's a story they aren't allowed to say out loud. This is the world passengers rarely notice. The world flight attendants quietly manage from takeoff to landing. One of the first secrets is that the lavatory door isn't as private as you think. There's an override switch hidden under the occupied sign that allows the crew to open it from the outside. It exists for emergencies, but also for those moments when someone disappears inside for too long and the crew has to assume the worst. They'll never tell you this, but they use it more often than you'd imagine. And no, it's not because someone is doing something scandalous in there. It's almost always because people faint, get stuck, panic, or forget to lock the door properly. Then there's the coffee. If you've ever wondered why flight attendants almost never drink it, the answer sits inside the aircraft water tank that feeds the hot water system. Those tanks aren't cleaned as often as passengers assume. Some crew jokingly call the water sky soup, and many simply bring their own beverages on board. When a flight attendant quietly suggests bottled water instead of hot drinks, trust them. They know what's inside those reservoirs better than anyone. What looks like effortless service is actually a highly coordinated safety ballet. You may have noticed that flight attendants always touch the overhead bins while they greet passengers. That's not for balance or politeness. They're checking for unusual weight, unsecured bags, strange smells, or anything that shouldn't be there. They're performing a silent security sweep while smiling, making small talk, and pretending it's just another boarding. They can spot a rule breaker, a drunk, a problem passenger, or a safety threat in 3 seconds flat. Passengers often don't realize how closely they're being observed. Flight attendants immediately scan your body language. Are your eyes glazed over from alcohol? Are you anxious, aggressive, confused, ill, or unusually secretive? The crew needs to predict who might cause trouble at 35,000 feet, because once the doors close, there's no backup, no police, no escape. Most passengers never notice, but the moment you walk onto the plane, a silent risk assessment has already been done on you. Security rules create some of the most surprising restrictions. For instance, flight attendants aren't allowed to help you lift your bag into the overhead bin, not because they don't want to be kind, but because if they injure themselves lifting something you packed too heavily, the airline, not you, becomes liable, and one injury can end a flight attendant's career. You might notice that instead of grabbing your suitcase, they position themselves nearby and offer verbal guidance only. It's not rudeness, it's survival in a job where every muscle matters. What many people also don't know is that flight attendants memorize the faces of babies. Not because they love kids more than adults, though some do, but because passengers are more likely to forget infants during evacuations. It sounds insane, but evacuation psychology proves it. When panic hits, people forget bags, phones, dignity, and sometimes even children. So flight attendants track exactly where babies are seated and who is responsible for them. It's one of those quiet responsibilities they'll never brag about. Another reality is that your blanket isn't as fresh as you think. Only the shrink-wrapped blankets are cleaned between flights, and those are usually reserved for long-haul or premium cabins. The rest? They're often folded, reshaped, and reused. The same goes for pillows. So whenever you see a blanket sitting neatly on your seat on a domestic flight, know that someone else probably used it a few hours earlier. Then there's turbulence, the great invisible monster of air travel. Passengers panic when the plane shakes, but most turbulence is harmless. What flight attendants fear isn't the turbulence itself. It's the passengers who ignore the seatbelt sign. The worst injuries they witness are not from crashes, but from people flying headfirst into the ceiling because they were walking down the aisle at the wrong time. That's why the crew sounds extra serious when they ask you to sit down. They've seen what can happen when you don't. If you've ever wondered why the cabin lights dim during takeoff and landing, it's not for aesthetics. Your eyes need time to adjust to darkness so that if an evacuation is necessary, you can see the emergency path lighting instantly. The crew can conduct a full evacuation in under 90 seconds, even in total darkness. The dimming of lights is part of that preparation, another safety detail that gets disguised as ambiance. And those oxygen masks? They only have about 12 to 15 minutes of oxygen. But that's enough, because if masks deploy, the pilot immediately drops the aircraft to 10,000 feet, where passengers can breathe normally again. The real secret is that flight attendants often have to secure themselves last, meaning the crew sometimes works without oxygen for precious seconds so they can help others first. Your tray table isn't just for food. For flight attendants, it's a diagnostic tool. If they suspect a passenger is drunk, ill, or hiding something, they'll ask them to lower the tray table, not because it matters, but because they want to see how steady your hands are. Little tests like this help them decide whether someone is safe to remain on board. When it comes to airplane food, the crew's biggest hidden concern is not taste, it's salt and carbs. Many meals are loaded with sodium because altitude dulls taste buds. The crew often avoids meals entirely because repeated consumption during long-haul schedules can cause bloating and dehydration. Two things flight attendants absolutely cannot afford during work. One of the most surprising truths is that flight attendants are trained fighters. They undergo self-defense training that includes wrist locks, restraint techniques, pressure point control, and even strategies for dealing with multiple attackers. They're also trained to identify human trafficking victims, smuggling behaviors, mental health crises, and drug mules. The friendly service is just one layer of their job. The protective instinct is another. Passengers often assume the crew sleeps comfortably on long flights, but the reality depends entirely on the aircraft. Some crew rest compartments are hidden bunk beds with low ceilings and no windows, like tiny secret hotel rooms above or below the cabin. Others are barely reclined seats partitioned off by a curtain. Either way, flight attendants share the same exhaustion passengers feel, often more. There's also a hierarchy few passengers notice. Flight attendants can instantly tell if a passenger is someone who flies constantly. You can see it in the way frequent flyers store their bags, choose seats, fasten their seatbelts, minimize requests, and walk through the plane with quiet efficiency. In return, the crew often treats experienced passengers with subtle perks, an extra drink, better service, or a more relaxed tone, because these passengers make the job easier. Some secrets are strange. The reason flight attendants ask you to open your window shades during takeoff and landing is because they need as many eyes as possible looking outside. If something is wrong with the engines, tires, flaps, or wings, passengers are more likely to spot smoke or fire first. Flight attendants can't see every window at once, so they rely on the cabin's collective visibility in emergencies. There are also things flight attendants aren't allowed to say out loud. When you hear, "We're experiencing a delay," the real reason might be a medical emergency, a mechanical fault, or a passenger they flagged as a potential safety risk. Many announcements are intentionally softened to avoid panic. Flight attendants also know which seats get the most and least turbulence, which lavatories are rarely used, which passengers are secretly terrified of flying, who's lying about being sober, and who is trying to sneak into a better seat. They also have a term for passengers who suddenly pretend to faint or collapse so they can be moved to business class. They call them miracle patients because the moment the wheels touch the ground, the injury miraculously disappears. And perhaps the most surprising truth of all is that despite seeing the worst of human behavior, tantrums, drunkenness, panic, entitlement, and chaos, flight attendants also witness the most heartwarming moments. People comforting strangers during turbulence, passengers helping exhausted parents, strangers offering food to others during delays, and children who hand-draw thank you notes for the crew. Flight attendants see the entire spectrum of humanity, from the best to the worst, every single day. Some secrets never change. They know which passengers will demand things the moment the seatbelt sign turns off. They know which travelers lie about peanut allergies just to avoid paying for snacks. They know who will snap their fingers for attention, who will pretend they didn't hear instructions, who will try to use the bathroom during taxi, and who will insist the rules don't apply to them. And they also know which passengers will quietly save the day if something goes wrong. But every flight attendant agrees that the real magic of flying is unseen. It's the teamwork in the galley, the whispered communications during emergencies, the unspoken trust between crew members, and the silent responsibility they carry for hundreds of lives in a metal tube hurtling through the sky. These aren't just service workers, they are safety officers, first responders, peacekeepers, and problem solvers who make the miracle of flight feel ordinary. And that's why these secrets matter. They keep hundreds of people safe without ever showing the stress, the fear, or the pressure they carry. Because for flight attendants, the job has one goal: make flying feel simple, even when everything happening behind the scenes is anything but.